Act 1 of Arcane Season 2 is now out on Netflix. So the first 3 episodes are out, and I have some thoughts, I have some musings, I have some things that I want to get off my chest. So this is going to be very random, very sporadic, very incoherent, just ramblings of a guy with a faintly distorted mind, if you will. So this is not going to be a review. This is not going to be some sort of a hard-hitting piece where I delve into like every single individual detail. These are just going to be like my overarching thoughts of the storyline as it is now, and perhaps where it's going in the upcoming episodes. So, spoiler alert, I'm going to be spoiling not just the first 3 episodes of Arcane second season, but also the entirety of the first season because it's a continuation. Makes sense, right? Anyway, minute is long enough of a boring intro. Let's just jump into it. So, second season starts off right off where the first ended. So, the bomb exploded, the council is blown up, and we are witnessing the aftermath. As someone intimately familiar with League lore, I didn't really know what to expect necessarily. I knew that most of the council was going to die. This was just sort of a kickoff for the plotline of the second season. The biggest question mark for everyone, I think, was Mel. She was not mentioned in any of the trailers. They were like really careful and curated the storyline around us not seeing whether she lives or dies. But that is quickly, disseminated because she does survive. It's a mystery, though. It's a mystery that the show brings up on purpose, so it's not like an oversight. The show legitimately poses the question, how did I survive without a scratch? Or rather, Jace poses that question, whereas Victor, who was like right next to me, got blown to smithereens almost. Victor also survives, but that's a different thing, right? So the show does bring up how they survived. It doesn't answer yet. There are quite a few theories. There's an idea that it's just Mel's innate magic that she may or may not be familiar with. Maybe she's unconsciously doing it. Maybe she's consciously doing it and forgetting it. There's also the idea that the Black Rose protected her because they wanted to use her to blackmail Ambessa or to, do stuff around that. It's a bit stretched out of a theory, but it's a plausible explanation at the end of the day. So I don't want to go beat by beat because second season is fast. It's torpedoing through plot points rather quickly, and I saw some people that didn't necessarily like it, that had issues with pacing, but I really don't get it because I remember when the first 3 episodes came out of the first season, the commentary was the same. It was amazing. It was mind-blowing. The pacing could have been a bit better. I never really bought into it. I objectively loved the pacing of both first acts of the both seasons. I don't like when shows meander because they want to give a breathing room. There's a difference between giving a minute-long respite where the pair of characters, exchange a dialogue versus just 4 minutes of fucking nothing where they just meander about, doing absolutely nothing to push the story forward. I've seen enough TV shows and movies that use filler as an excuse to give, the story a breathing room or the audience time, to catch up to the events of everything, that I'm more cynical about it these days than I used to be, whereas like, okay, you're not doing that to give a breathing room. You're doing that to extend the runtime because you don't know how to fill it otherwise. I've been burned by the second season of The Walking Dead, where this was at the forefront, like this giving the breathing room to stuff was just like the most boring thing in the world. So I much prefer when the stories just want to go through their beats, occasionally pausing because Arcane does pause from time to time to give you like a second to catch up. But it doesn't really offer you that much in the way of like, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to just get distracted, on your phone because I don't really have anything important to say at the moment. So it just sort of speeds through a lot of the early plot lines, which is why I think people would think that the first episode feels kind of rushed. But ultimately, I think it sort of mirrors the events of the story in the first episode itself. Everything is being rushed, The entire city is in panic. Their leadership has been obliterated. There's another terror attack not a few days later where a bunch of people are killed. So we see this sort of through the lens of people in the universe where everything is just getting mowed through like rapidly in succession. So I really appreciate that. I liked it. I thought that stopping to take a breather and have an emotional moment, while it would have probably worked, like I trust Arcane writers enough to, afford them that benefit of the doubt, I am okay with not really having that moment just yet. I mean, that's sort of a lie because we do have emotional respite several times across 3 episodes. But yeah. Anyway, so let's actually jump around a little bit and talk about things that I like the most. So ending of the 3rd episode was definitely a mind bender. I don't know where they're going with Hextech. This is not canonical as far as I can tell. Like, there is nothing in league law to suggest that Hextech is sort of a self-actualized entity with will of its own, right? There is nothing in the law, so this is entirely new. I have no idea where they're going with this. Chances are that it's just going to be a blend of tech and magic that mimics the idea of like technological singularity. If you understand the concept of technological singularity, is this supercharged AI that fast surpasses, human intelligence. It could be that, or it could just be malevolent force of nature, where it's just this sort of a metaphor for nature itself, where if we exploit nature and if we cut down the trees and burn coal and all that stuff, eventually there's a reaction to all our actions. Hextech could be a metaphor to that, because in the 1st season it has been well and abused by several people, and it continues to be abused in this season, even more so with Jace crafting a bunch of Hextech weapons. So there's an entire chance that Hextech itself is just a metaphor for the Mother Nature, basically. That if we exploit it long enough, eventually it's going to answer. Not because it has a will of its own, not because it wants to, but it's just the relationship of cause and effect that it has with us. So I really like the scene, even divorced from the song and the action scene being played out parallel to it. I like the way they visualized Hextech as this sort of a 4th-dimensional thing that we don't really comprehend because the characters in universe don't comprehend it, so there's no reason for us to be able to do that. So it's just like this weird thing right now that exists almost in a vacuum, I want to say, but not necessarily so, because obviously it has connections with a broader story. But I'm looking forward to where they take it. Like, in one of the trailers, they kind of give a glimpse into the future episode where they say the Arcane is waking up. So that's a hint of where it's going, that it's not necessarily this intelligent thing raising an army, basically, but just like this natural reaction of something that exists in nature whilst being exploited by people. Beyond that, we have the first of what could possibly be several fights between Vi, Jinx, and Caitlyn. And I liked it. I liked the fallout because I think we all kind of knew where this plotline was going, that if they converge in the first 3 episodes, it's going to result in a major fallout because you still have 6 episodes worth of story to fill out. And if everyone is nice to each other, there's really no story to tell there. So I knew where this was going. I enjoyed it still. I liked watching Caitlyn just lose her absolute shit. Because, it's empathetic losing of shit. Like, I'm not saying that she's unjustified in feeling the way she does, despite, her actions being kind of questionable, which is the strength of the season and the first season in general, where you're watching characters commit acts that like, logically speaking, they don't make any sense, right? But from an emotional standpoint, you sort of understand where they're coming from because of whatever holistic trauma they just went through. In Caitlyn's case, she just lost her mom, right? She watched people that she tried to protect and defend, right, burn her city, kill a bunch of innocent people that had nothing to do with what was happening in Zorn. So she witnessed all this firsthand. So things in her mind are beginning to snap. She begins to question her own judgment. She's like, I trusted these people. I trusted they were being exploited, that they were nice, that they just wanted to be free. But why would they do this? Why would they kill a bunch of innocent people for apparently no reason? So things start unraveling in her mind fast. And I think a lot of people are also going to mention that her arc feels a bit sped up, but I legitimately don't think that's the case because this is an entirely emotionally driven arc. There is no logic to be applied here, and if you're trying to do that, you're missing the point. Caitlyn is no longer being governed by logic. It's one of those moments in our lives that we all experience where, despite the fact that if we had an outside perspective, we could look at our actions and our thoughts and say, okay, that is objectively wrong. she's no longer being governed by that. She's being governed by emotional turmoil, by emotional trauma, and people like that don't give a shit about logical outcomes because it's not in their perspective, and it's entirely understandable. So I am on board with her arc of turning into like this dictatorial figure. Like, I want to see where they go with this. Like, she's not gonna be that forever. Eventually she's gonna flip the script and become nice. Like, we know that it is coming, but still I would like to see the journey that she takes to get there. So we get a kiss between her and Vi for the first time, so it's full-on canon now that they, into each other, if it wasn't abundantly obvious from the first season. It's superseded by them breaking up like 15 minutes later, so it feels a bit bittersweet, but I kind of saw it coming. The kiss itself honestly felt sort of like fan service. Like, I'm not saying it wasn't earned or anything like that, but the writers were like, okay, we're gonna break her up. We're gonna break them up in like 15 minutes. Here, have something to squeal over. It was still nice and endearing, and I liked it. Because I always like watching romantic relationships progress. I don't like when they stagnate, so kudos, for doing that and then breaking them up immediately. Speaking of the breakup, I don't know how to feel about it, honestly. Like, it feels kind of on the nose, but at the same time, it tracks with the evolution of Caitlyn's character. Like, she's going through it. She's ramping up. Like, if you remember Vi very early on in the first season, before the even time skip, she was just angry. Like, that was her thing. She was just angry at everything. She was just this rebellious little kid who was lashing out against the world because she thought everything about it was unfair. Caitlyn is going through that same thing right now. You could say that she's an adult, but ultimately I think even right now she's at best in her late teens. Like, we're talking maybe 19, maybe 20 years old at the most. Like, I don't think even she's that old. I'm thinking she's closer to 18. That's still a teenager, dude. That's still somebody who's wrestling with their hormones and trying to figure out who they are. And now she has to do it in this world that she feels betrayed by. The same way, Vi felt betrayed by the world because it took her parents away from her and she was forced to live in these, absolutely abject conditions. Caitlyn feels the same things, just from, a different perspective. So I sort of get the breakup and the sort of full circle imagery of how Vi left Powder in episode 3. Now Kate is leaving Vi. Obviously, it's very different. The relationships are different. The sentiments are different. The scales of everything are different. But I liked it. I liked the breakup. Moving on from them, let's talk about Jinx. Jinx, I legitimately think Jinx's main motivation for the first 3 episodes, or rather 2 episodes that she was in, was just to die. I think that at the moment is cornerstone of her character. She's just over everything, dude. She's broken. She no longer even hears the voices as much. She's just completely divorced from reality itself, and that numbness, I think, is even worse than psychotic pain that she was in. It's just this emptiness of nothing. And we got introduced to a little spark from the bench. Isha, I don't know how they're going to pronounce her name. I think she's going to be a nice mirror to Jinx to sort of look at what could have been. This is the central theme of Arcane in general, like what could have been. If everyone made the logical choice and the right decision, what could have been. I think Jinx is going to wake up from her stupor to sort of outplay the alternate version of events where Isha gets to become a reasonably, nice, quote-unquote, grown-up that doesn't have to suffer through all of her childhood. So I think that's going to be a nice thing to see. I like the pair up with Savika. I think the two of them have a really nice dynamic. They had it in the first season as well, but now they're more unified because there's really nobody else in the world, I feel, that can understand each other as well as the two of them can. But at the same time, it's also a ticking time bomb of a relationship because as far as I can tell, Savika doesn't know that Jinx killed Silco. And she will learn at one point in the second season, and it's going to be a major fallout. I'm guessing episode 6 is when that's going to be revealed, where everyone is going to learn it was actually Jinx who killed Silco. So there's going to be a major fallout across the board. So yeah, it's one of those things where we can't really have nice things, as it were. So I'm still looking forward to it, despite the fact that I know where it's going. But that's sort of the strength of Arcane's writing. It doesn't necessarily try to surprise you with like shit from nowhere. It gives you all the crumbs. It gives you all the foreshadowing you may need, and then you can put the pieces together. And more often than not, you will be correct in your interpretations with the occasional, shifts and twists. But I enjoy that. I enjoy being proven right where I'm engaged with an episode and I think about future events, right? And those future events eventually come to pass and I feel smart. It feels nice, unlike Game of Thrones, where it's like, oh, you think that's going to happen because we set it up over the course of 5 seasons. We don't give a shit about that. Here, have something entirely out of blue happen because that way you're surprised. So, moving on from Jinx, actually, let me just mention another thing. She's meandering right now. She feels like she has nowhere to go. So first 2 episodes of Jinx that we've seen is essentially just her working through I want to die and I want Vi to kill me. I think that was the essentialism of her character. She's going to move on from it. She's going to start evolving once again. So I'm reserving my judgment of her for the future. Next in line is Echo, Jace, and Heimerdinger. The unlikely trio that I ended up liking way more than I thought. Their dynamic is just so goofy, dude. Like, you have this Heimerdinger, this ancient dude that has the innocence of a child. That's just who he is. Like, he has understanding of the absolute core of the world, but he doesn't have understanding of how humans perceive it and how humans live it. So he's this outsider with these like big thoughts and big ideas that just sort of, lives, and I like him. I like the goofiness. I like this sort of juxtaposition of Heimerdinger just having the time of his life with Echo just lamenting that everything is falling apart. I like the 3 of them. I like the budding relationship between Echo and Jace. I think there's a potential there. I don't think they're ever going to become the best of friends, but I think Echo will be a nice gateway for Jace to see what he missed with Victor. The point that he missed with Victor's character and why ultimately Victor decided to leave. Despite the fact that his leaving probably has something to do with the hex core within him. Echo will be a nice sort of insight into why in the first season him and Victor had a falling out, specifically of the things he believed in and actions, that he did. So that's going to be nice. And obviously they go to the hex core and it's just losing its shit. Like, I love that scene. Beyond that, is there really anything else? Like, Smeech and Savika fight was super cool. I loved Jinx and Isha's reactions to the fight were just like these brief cutaways to these like surprised and shocked faces and playful faces. I love that. And it's so on the nose for Jinx to do that. Like, hey, have this gun or rather gauntlet that can do everything, but only if you roll the dice correctly. It can kill you. We don't know if it's gonna kill you. It might kill the world, or it might kill you. Just roll the dice and see what happens. That's so in line with the character. Just like pure raw chaos. I love it. Every episode, we see glimpses of Singed doing something. I don't think Singed is necessarily going to play a big role in this season. I think he's going to remain very much a background character. Now, big spoiler alert for the future, the wolf that he's rearing is essentially Warwick from League of Legends, that is whose original body was Vander. I don't think much, if anything, of Vander really remains in Warwick as we know him in League Raw, but maybe they change something in Arcane. So Warwick, or resurrected Vander as it were, will play a role because we've seen him in the trailer. We saw a flash of him running through, and there's going to be a big fight, I think, between him and Vi in especially second upcoming act. But as far as Singed goes, I think his storyline in Piltover and Zorn is essentially finished because in his original lore, he's far more endangered with Noxus rather and Ionia than he is with Piltover and Zorn. Like, yeah, he's from Piltover and Zorn essentially, but his story is far more connected with Noxus and Invasion of Ionia. So I think they're gonna save him for that if they ever decide to do a show in those two places. For now, he's probably gonna fade into the background. Maybe occasionally pop up with some new tech with Shimmer and whatnot, but in terms of like larger storylines, I don't think they're going to utilize it that much. I could be wrong, but I don't think I'm going to be. So, what else is there? Is there anything else to mention? Well, we have Ambessa, we have Black Rose. For the uninitiated, if you're still sticking around, Black Rose is sort of like the Illuminati of League of Legends lore, except it's real and they actually do have magical powers. It's this covenant of mages in Noxus that essentially control everything. As far back as the fall of Mordekaiser, like it's a big thing with League lore that I don't want to get into because it doesn't really have anything to do with Arcane itself. Like I don't think Black Rose is gonna be explored necessarily in this season. It's just an introductory season where we're setting it up probably for future shows where people go, oh, Black Rose, I remembered them because they were like really cool in the Arcane. And yeah, they're kind of cool. I don't. A lot of people are saying that LeBlanc will show up, which is one of the League of Legends characters. I think if she's gonna show up, it's gonna be purely for fan service because I don't think she has anything to do with the story of Arcane and Zorn because she's far more connected to Noxus and Ionia eventually. I don't know. We gotta see. I'm interested with what happens with Ambessa, Mel, and Black Rose, but I also feel like that's just gonna be like a side thing that's not gonna be resolved by the end of the Arcane. I think she's eventually gonna get Mel back, but it's gonna end on the note of like, oh, so you're basically starting the war with Black Rose. We're gonna destroy you, and that's gonna be the end of that plotline. It's not gonna be resolved in any capacity whatsoever because that's a completely divorced reality from the one that we're living out in Arcane. Ambessa's role going on, I think, is gonna be potentially as a mother figure to Kate because she's desperate for one. She had a turbulent relationship with her mom, if you can recall, in the first season. They didn't always see eye to eye. So she's probably going to try, well, not necessarily try, but I think it's naturally going to develop into this surrogate mom relationship with Ambessa. And Ambessa is going to try and exploit that. Or it might be like Silco, where she goes in with the intent of exploiting, but eventually she sort of just becomes the role she's pretending to be. So that's entirely a possibility. We might see the full circle of that happening again. I don't think she's going to be antagonist of the second season. I don't think second season is going to have an antagonist like Silco. It's just going to be a bunch of broken people trying to figure out a way forward and a few opportunistic pricks exploiting them along the way. Besides that, we had the Kate squad. There's that bushy dude that like Vanda, if Vanda wore a costume. Definitely not Vanda, right skin. I don't know what's happening with him. He's clearly being set up to be more than just like a throwaway character. I don't know who he is. I don't think he exists in current League of Legends lore as far as I can tell. He's an entirely new character. Maybe he has connections with Zorn. Maybe that's why he's sympathetic to Vi, because he kind of knows where she's coming from. Maybe that's why he leaves when Caitlyn dons the mantle of a dictator, because, you know, he doesn't like seeing that, because he knows what it can do to people when they have one leader just doing whatever the fuck they want. I have no idea, so I'm kind of interested to see where it goes. For now, his character is just sort of being kept in the dark. Another critique of the first 3 episodes was that they weren't developed. I'm like, okay, I'd understand if this was like the 9th episode. They were like, well, we have a bunch of these side characters that were never developed. Like, okay, you give it time. You know, if by 9th episode none of them are developed, then you can go, well, fuck, these characters suck dick. And I'm going to be on board with you. I think if they stay the way they are now, as just like these background characters for Kate to fill out the screen of followers, that's going to be such a wasted opportunity. But for now, just let them breathe for a moment. You know, they've just been introduced. I think those are all the plot points that I wanted to talk about. Yeah, that's pretty much it, honestly. Like, there's still a lot to mention, like, if you really want to go analyze in super detail. The Victor, I haven't mentioned Victor at all, because I think this is the beginning of the ultimate expression of him as a character in League lore as we know him now, with the caveat that they actually did redesign him a little bit. In League lore, Victor is just augmented machine. He's a person that's been augmented through machinery, which is why he says the glorious evolution. I don't think it's gonna track. They're gonna have to retcon his League lore because the way he becomes Victor in the TV show is just so decidedly different. And I'm looking forward to where he goes. He's clearly going to become a messiah figure. I mean, they were not being subtle about that. The question is, whether the writers of Arcane are going to be cynical or optimistic about that role. You can kind of see the outlook of writers when you look at prophetic figures in movies, TV shows, and books. How do they treat people that are viewed as prophets? Cynics treat them as warlords, essentially. So Victor is raising an army that he's going to use to fix the world, quote unquote, right, and make it right. So bad actions stemming from good intentions. That's sort of the cynical view of prophets. The optimistic view is that he's just literally doing the healing. He just wants to help people. He doesn't want to become part of the greater conflict. He just wants to be entirely divorced from it. So it could go either way, honestly. It could go either way. But my gut feeling is that with the knowledge that I have of League lore, as well as the first season of Arcane, I think that the writers are gonna take a cynical route where, despite his good intentions, the hex core in him is gonna probably push him beyond the sort of boundaries of comfort, where he's not just gonna be healing people, but he's legitimately gonna be raising an army that is gonna have an instrumental part, possibly in the last act, where it's just every storyline is going to converge. So I'm reserving my judgment for Victor. I think it's cool. I think it's very interesting. But his is one of those stories where you kind of have to see the end to be fully able to appreciate the journey. So until I see that end, I'm just going to like, do your thing, dude. I'm invested in whatever you're doing. Let me see where to go with this. So yeah, those are the major plot lines. I haven't mentioned Jace's relationship with the mage figure and how it relates to hex core, the concept of wild runes and such. But again, these are just like the budding seeds that don't really have any answer. So I could speculate based on League lore and spoil the living shit out of it. But considering how many retcons Arcane has had over the original lore, my speculation may be entirely wrong, because Hextech, as it exists in Arcane, is entirely incompatible with how it used to exist in League lore. So everything around it is like, well, what the fuck is going to happen? I don't know. So let's see where it takes us. That was Arcane, Act 1 of Season 2. I loved it. I would probably rate it like 9.5 out of 10. My only critique would probably be that there were just too many montages. I am okay with them doing it the way they did in Season 1, but I have a feeling that they're trying to replicate specifically 7th episode of Season 1 with like dual montages to start with and then in the middle of the episode. It's too much. It's just like rein back the songs a little bit. But even then, it's like the very minor critique, because I don't mind them. They're like the good device to use in storytelling, especially because they contain mostly to the intro of the episode. So if you don't like them, you can pretty much just skip them and sort of catch up on what was happening a bit later on. But I love action scenes. I love the art. They have somehow managed to upgrade it. It feels like they've added a lot more detail in the mannerism, in the movement, in the expressions. So it feels closer to Uncanny Valley, but not actually Uncanny Valley. It's just like this bordering sense of realism. But because of the way they're drawn, you can still sort of pull yourself back and just appreciate the beauty of it rather than be creeped out by how human-like their mannerisms are. Love the song so far. My favorites are probably the reimagination of Heavy is the Crown in a much softer way. I absolutely adore that. I need a full song version of that. And Woodkid's Blood and something, I can't remember the name of the song. The one that I placed in episode 3. The choir, part of it was just mind-bendingly amazing. So yeah, that was those are my thoughts. I'm going to be back for Act 2 next week. Hopefully. Right, let me actually just speculate on what's going to happen in Act 2 a little bit. So I'm pretty sure we're going to see a time jump. And not just because they did it in the first season, but through a lot of promo art and promo trailers and such, you can kind of see two very distinct timelines unfolding. So we're going to see a time skip. It's not going to be a big one, or at least not as big of a one as it was in the first season, which I think was like 4, 5, 6 years. This is probably going to be closer to like 2-3 years at the maximum, where right now we're in this status, not necessarily status quo, but we sort of know what's going to happen in the immediate future. So Piltover is not going to invade Zone immediately. The first got to raise an army, they got to train it, they're going to build a bunch of Hextech weaponry. So that's probably going to be the part that we skip. Jinx and Isha are just going to be in the background, maybe sort of embodying the flag of the rebellion movement. I don't know what's going to happen there. Vi is just broken. She doesn't know what the fuck to do with her life, so we can't really follow her because all she's going to be doing for the next 2-3 years is just drinking and passing out in the middle of nowhere. Like, that's going to be her character arc, so we're going to skip that. The biggest issue with time skip that I can see happening is what happens with Mel. Like, I don't think we can skip immediately, or we're going to have to tell Mel's story in a flashback, which I don't like. I don't like when stories resort to flashbacks, but I get it. I'm going to be okay with it because they did flashbacks relatively well in season 1. They didn't, rely on them too much. They weren't a crutch for storytelling. So if they only want to have Mel's flashback storyline, I am okay with that. So after the time skip, I don't know. Piltover and Zorn will definitely be at war, but I don't think it's going to be as open as people are wanting. Like, it's not going to be an outright war. It's sort of going to be the way rebellions and civil wars tend to be, where it's just going to be a bunch of small-time skirmishes where one side clearly has way more firepower. Like, Piltover has way more firepower, but Zorn, they can sneak in up there, release a bunch of poisonous gas, blow shit up. I think that's going to be the state of the war in the second act. Jinx is going to try and become the icon of the movement of Zorn, the independence of Zorn. I don't think she's going to embrace the role. I think she's eventually going to abandon that role because she doesn't want to do that. She doesn't want to become an icon or anything. She just fucking hates the living shit out of herself. So I think her arc is going to be humanizing herself, accepting all the wrongs that she's done, and trying to redeem herself in her own way in small, very small ways that have nothing to do with Piltover. Like, she's never going to redeem herself in the eyes of the Piltover. She's always going to be an enemy. But this idea of self-acceptance and elevating above our sins, I think she's going to try and slowly begin walking down that path, obviously with the help of that little grunt and maybe Sevika, until that gets interrupted because Sevika figures out that she killed Selko, and then that becomes the whole thing. So I'm looking forward to that. It's going to be another punch in the gut, but I'm expecting that from Arcane at this point. Jace, Echo, and Heimerdinger, I think, are going to start seeing things. I think second act is going to be where Echo starts figuring out his power from the game, which is ability to turn back time a few seconds, specifically because they've been quote-unquote touched by that big hex core, right? I think they're gonna start developing strange. I wouldn't say abilities, but the way they're gonna see the world is gonna start changing. It's gonna become distorted because they're gonna see in more dimensions, as it were. So I'm looking forward to the way they treat that. Whether it's gonna be super on the nose, whether it's gonna be closer to the way they treated, for instance, Jinx's psychosis in first season rather, or whether it's gonna be just way more subdued, where it's not ever called out for, but if the story shifts to the perspective of Jace, for instance, in the background, characters' faces are going to be like weird, maybe buildings are not going to make sense, everything is going to seem a bit off. So I'm looking forward to the way they handle that. So yeah, that's gonna be a blast. But yeah, I think that covers every major plotline. And Bessa and Black Rose, I honestly don't know where they go with this. I think they prematurely introduced Black Rose because they could have held back a little bit for second act, but I don't know where it goes. I think it's gonna be resolved in second act and just sort of fade into background, because the third act is just gonna be the entire blow up of everything, where everyone is gonna be at war, everyone's gonna be miserable, and eventually we're gonna steamroll to a conclusion. And at that conclusion, Black Rose is gonna be brought back as if to say, hey, look, we exist, and in a future show, I'm going to be here to fuck shit up. So, yeah, I think Mel, nothing's going to happen to Mel. Her and Jace are probably going to have a happy ending, because even in the sea of misery, you need a couple of people to be happy, for the love of God. Bessa, if she wasn't introduced as the champion in League of Legends, I could have seen her dying in this season. But because she's now integral part of League lore, she ain't going anywhere. she's gonna stay and she's gonna become an instrumental character for the future shows, most likely, especially the ones having to do with Noxus. So yeah, she's staying. I'm a bit sour on that because one of my early predictions about second season was that Mel is gonna kill Ambessa as this act of ultimate defiance and protection of what she believed in, because Ambessa would want to use Hextech and Mel was gonna be like, no, I don't want to do that. So they have a huge fallout and maybe she even kills her, either, you know, directly or incidentally. So that's not gonna happen. But this also means that there is potential for actually Mel's death. Like, I don't know if writers are willing to go that dark, but there is potential that Mel dies, and that sets off Ambessa essentially in a warpath where she just steals Hextech from Piltover and marches her army to Nexus, and that is then the next increment of a League of Legends story. That's entirely possible in my opinion. I don't know if that's gonna happen because it sounds insane, but it's entirely possible. So thank you all for listening to my rambling for what feels like half an hour at the very least, possibly even longer than that. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know what theories you guys have, whether they align with mine or whether yours are way more sophisticated and thought out. So I'm going to see you next week when the second act comes out and I can be proven right or more likely wrong on every single account of my predictions. And that's going to be fun. So cheers and see ya.